or not, but the election cycle already starting up, even though petitions to get on the primary ballot haven't quite opened. We've got a lot of politics that we're going to be wading through in the next, 18 months before the November 2026 election. Not just State House stuff, right? Of course, here on Illinois in Focus Daily, we focus on what's going on at the State House, but there's going to be an opportunity for voters across the state to select not just a new U.S. senator, but also members of Congress. And one of those candidates looking to run for Congress, joining us live here with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to get the headlines in your inbox each and every weekday morning at thecentersquare.com, but you can also wake up with us here on YouTube for Illinois in Focus Daily. Christian, I want to make sure that you have your microphone unmuted on your end, and we'll bring you up. Christian Maxwell is a candidate for Congress, and she joins us now here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us. And for people who don't know you, let's just go ahead and let's hear who Christian Maxwell is.
For sure. So my name is Christian Maxwell. I'm an Illinois native, born and raised downstate Illinois, actually. So I'm from St. Clair County, but I made my way to Chicago to go to college, and then I just never left. So I'm a candidate running in Illinois District 1. And I know people always ask, like, what would make somebody in their right mind do this? It really just comes down to literally driving through my area, and I actually live in my district. And the more and more you see the dysfunction, it really just provokes you to want to be a part of change, however you can do that. So I've been working to do community service. I've been working to do quite a few things, not just this run for office, because I really do want to see things change even before this election. So I'm an average person. I'm an entrepreneur, a mother, a wife of 10 years, and I'm just a person who wants to see families thrive in Illinois. It really is as simple as that for me.
So we've got, of course, a lot to tackle when it comes to everything from the national deficit to international affairs to crime on the streets. And I know that Chicago has experienced just horrific acts even over the holiday weekend, heading into the holiday weekend. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson set to have a news conference today. I imagine he's going to be asked about the response that's necessary for violence. What's your experience been in District 1 as a taxpayer, as a citizen, somebody who sees these headlines, and how do we address that? How do we affect an actual change to the climate there in Chicago?
So my experience has been that there are people here who, want to make this a home. They have made it their home, and they're doing their very best to impact their immediate surroundings. But when you have a total lack of infrastructure and support for things like our police, what you have is that crime does get to the point where it just becomes the norm. So it's nothing unusual for my husband and I to be watching TV in the evening and hear gunshots, and we'll just be like, oh, okay. And it's just a part of the evening. And I live in Woodlawn, and there are actually $1 million homes amongst where I live. But it is nothing unusual for you to hear somebody, discharge a weapon. Even realizing that with CPD, they can only respond to about 50% of calls as of right now because they're down about 3,000 officers. And one of the things that Mayor Brandon said he was going to do was that he was going to increase the number of detectives so he could close more cases. More cases are not being closed. And crime at this point, it has become the norm. People's property is not safe. Property crime is at an all-time high here. So the things I really want to see change is for more crime to be actually convicted. And when somebody is arrested, the arrest needs to hold to keep law-abiding citizens safe. I don't know how we got to the point in Illinois and in Chicago where the criminal is much more advocated for than the law-abiding citizen who will probably never commit a crime more than a minor traffic violation. That just can't be how we've decided it is okay for us all to exist. It's not sustainable.
We're talking with Christian Maxwell. She's a candidate for Congress in District 1. And you've got different roles in the Congress than what maybe, the State House has, of course. But when it comes to federal funds, there's been a lot of conversation about withholding grants from cities that have sanctuary policies for non-citizens. While at the same time, you've got Mayor Johnson talking about how, they need more, quote, progressive revenue to fund things like violence interruption, with grants going going out to non-government organizations with the goal of trying to interrupt violence. Where do you stand on the federal funding, the possible freeze to get them to comply with federal law, and how that impacts a goal that Johnson has, for instance, to spend more dollars on trying to bring about violence interruption?
So I would not necessarily be in favor of investing dollars extensively into things that are going to go to not-for-profits until you see investment in the actual police where they can actually work on the crime that's already happening and criminals that are very much so into their career of crime. When we're talking about violence interruption, yes, that's great for kids that are, of younger age, and they really do just need to have the trajectory of their life changed. I can see that. But if we're talking about somebody who has already been locked up multiple times and is either out on bail and things of that nature, we're not going to sit at this point and, have a little circle and talk about how we can change our behavior. At that point, we do have to actually empower the police inside of Chicago and the surrounding areas to be able to keep the civilians safe and people who are law-abiding citizens. So when it comes to federal funds and things of that nature, I am not opposed to the fact that some federal funds have been withheld from mayors like Mayor Johnson, because you can't continue to have money funnel into programs that do not work and then defund the program that needs to have the most investment. That just is not logical. And at this point in time, we can clearly see that his method, it has not yielded any fruit. People do not feel safe. And I think that for him, he looks at it and says, well, oh, violent crime is a little bit down. But the thing is that you have so many citizens leaving Illinois in Chicago because they don't feel safe. People aren't actually interacting in their communities as much as they normally would because they don't feel safe. They're not going downtown because they don't feel safe. When you don't feel safe, it impacts every level of society. Business owners don't want to invest. People don't want to go and actually support businesses. And it really just causes a massive disruption in the entire ecosystem of a community. So if we cannot have an entire reboot of how we look at crime and how we address it in a city as robust as a Chicago and the surrounding suburbs, this city will continue to fall. So I'm hoping that I'm a part of change and the improvement moving forward.
If you can, talk about the politics here, and how does somebody with your values break through that blue wall that Chicago is, and the Cook County and the Collier counties have traditionally kind of been when it comes to getting a person with a certain conservative perspective in an elected position?
I think that people are at this point getting to the real point in this journey where they have to realize that, hey, the perspective I have on how to address this might not really be as multifaceted as it needs to be to fix the overall issue. As of right, I mean, we just saw in Glen Ellen, they had what they called a flash mob, where an entire pool was taken over by out of town people, and they were pushing the lifeguards and everything into the water, smoking and drinking and all of those things. So it's all fun, and I would say it's all fun and games, to say, oh, everybody, we need to have a totally warm and welcoming environment. We need to make sure we're not actually being tough on crime and all of that. It's convenient to say it when the crime has not reached you. But for those of us that live adjacent to or in the midst of crime and know that when you call 911, they can't always get to you because the police department is underfunded and recruitment is down, and you don't have any actual legislators who represent Illinois actually saying, hey, we're going to back the police, not because we want to facilitate an environment that feels predatory to people, but because we want you to be safe. It really is that simple. And I think that people who are ready to really lean towards common sense and who want for their children to grow up in safe communities, and that should cross party, that should cross race. Safety is something that we all are entitled to. It's a basic need. And it's something that I don't see a lot of politicians advocating for whatever reason. The thing is that the average citizen doesn't have the resources, the manpower to guard themselves the way that a lot of our politicians do. Even people like Brandon Johnson, he walks around with what, 100-person guard. We don't have that luxury. So for us, we do actually need for police to be able to actually secure our communities, and we do need for crime that has not been crime to be actually convicted appropriately, so that people who are repeat offenders are removed from society until they're actually ready to re-enter. This cycle of getting locked up overnight and then being back, it just does not work.
I want to ask you about the big, beautiful bill here in a moment, but the Congress, how can being in Congress and your role, if you were to win this seat, how could you effectuate those things on the ground in Illinois when it does take impacting the mayor's office, impacting state law? Mm-hmm. How does a member of Congress go about effectuating that?
Right now, one of the biggest things, and it's not actually, I guess, if you looked at the list of ways that a legislator could impact the situation happening in Illinois, one thing that I have noticed as a person who did move away for 4 years is that the news and the people who have the loudest voices in the state, they all will tell a lie altogether. And then that lie becomes truth. So a lot of people in Illinois, when they were missing out on the funding that Chicago needed for RTA and all of these different things, there was a narrative that was crafted, and it was fed to all of the citizens, and they felt that, oh, we're being harmed by the president, when in all actuality, the demand and the request was that, hey, you really do have to coordinate with the federal government and with these departments about the citizens and the people that you have in your city and your state. And once you do that, you will be able to have access to your funding. The city and state did not comply, but they chose to tell citizens that it was just them being mistreated and being targeted. One thing I do plan on doing is making sure that if I am elected, and even if I'm not, people will always know that they can come to me or wherever I am or whatever platform I have access to get the whole story about what is truly going on, so they can then go to their alderman or they can go to their mayor and they can go to whomever and say, hey, here's what's actually happening. We want to know why you're not complying with this request that would make it where our infrastructure is funded. Why are we missing out on federal funding for these things? But at the end of the day, the thing that I'm also in favor of is cities like Chicago can't continue to access funding from the federal government for things like discretionary things if they're not going to actually do the work of advocating for their citizens. Even things when you look at like the Illinois budget that just passed, for states that don't want to give their citizens an actual opportunity to understand what's going to be in their budget bill, and they want to just pass it overnight and sneak it in and then run away. That's something that should not be rewarded at a federal level. If a state does not want to at least give their citizens 72 hours to see what's going to be in a budget, especially for states like Illinois that make a habit of just sneaking that budget in, there should be something that happens at a federal level that is a little bit of I don't want to say a chastising, but hey, it's like if you're not going to advocate for your citizens and you're not going to do the things that are going to make their life just improved, then somebody does have to step in temporarily until better behaviors are built. I don't want to see the federal government overly meddling in state affairs, but Illinoisans are being held hostage, and that is the thing that I continue to hear from anybody that I talk to. They feel like they're held hostage by all of their state leadership. At that given point in time, somebody does have to see how they can step in to actually advocate for the citizens, because the state leaders have proven that they are not going to do that.
All right, Christian Maxwell, finally here. Big, beautiful bill. A lot of stuff in there. What are some of the highlights or maybe lowlights you see in that massive piece of legislation that President Donald Trump signed on Independence Day?
Yeah, it is definitely a very big piece of legislation. One of the things that I was excited about was workforce pay. I think for Illinois and getting Illinoisans back working, I think that the workforce pay is going to be a very big deal for Illinois. What it does is that it allows for constituents or for people in general to be able to access a Pell Grant for a program that is 8 to 15 weeks in length. A lot of people think that this is something that was already in place, but the key difference between the regular Pell Grant and workforce Pell is that workforce Pell is specifically for very short-term certifications that lead directly to a career. So if a program is able to actually prove that within a year they are actually getting people successfully into roles directly from their certification program, whether something like a CNA program or any of those things that may fall within the 8 to 15 weeks, that program will be eligible for workforce Pell, making a pivot in career more accessible than ever. There's so many things that were obviously in that bill, but for me, knowing and understanding the job situation in Illinois, that is one of the things that I'm most excited for Illinoisans to be able to leverage in the coming future, because it will honestly change the game for a lot of people who couldn't simply afford to go and pay for schooling out of their pocket and need to pivot their career because of either their job being phased out or a company leaving, which we've seen a lot of in Illinois. So I know I spoke about this on TikTok, and it literally, the video went viral, and there are thousands of people commenting who are excited to see how this is going to come to life for them. And it definitely seemed like a topic that crossed party boundaries, because I saw people of all walks of life who were very excited about the workforce Pell situation. So that's something that I was really excited about in the bill. At the end of the day, I am a person who would love to see these budget bills and things get broken down. I don't like seeing seeing a 900-page document. I actually downloaded it and was going through it. That is too much. That's too much to be put through at one time. But I do understand that as of right now, there's a lot that needs to be addressed and fixed, and there's a lot of neglect that has been happening at the federal level. So in the future, what I would like to see as Trump gets farther into his term is that we are seeing more efficient, more focused bills of this nature. But another thing that I was excited about as well is that there is a separate allocation for rural hospitals. So hospitals that are more that are in rural areas that are more pushed, out on their own or struggling. There is a $50 billion allocation in the Big Beautiful Bill to help those hospitals to access much needed funding to invest in things like equipment and all of that. So that's another thing that I know is really key for a good portion of my district, especially towards those more rural areas of it, and for just Illinois in general, because there's a lot of areas that are really just out on their own here. So I'm really excited about that as well.
Well, if you could just briefly here square that up with what like Governor J.B. Pritzker saying, and what you've got Democrats in Congress saying, that people are going to die, and the Congressional Budget Office over 10 years saying that 12 million people are going to be kicked off of the health rolls, and Pritzker even saying rural hospitals are going to close. Square that up with what you just shared with us. Are they being hyperbolic? Is it just a 2026 campaign pitch? What's going on there? What's behind that?
It is honestly fear mongering. And I know we hear that phrase. People use it all of the time on both sides. But to say that that many people are going to die, they told us that as well if we didn't get, different treatments and things as a result of the pandemic. I think that what a lot of politicians like Pritzker need to do is, instead of trying to just fear his constituents into doing what he wants them to do, he needs to actually inform them and let them make an informed decision, because a lot of people rely on him to tell the truth, and it's rare that he can actually pull that off. So when we look at the fact that people will be off of ACA or things of that nature, what the Big Beautiful Bill calls for is for people who actually can work and provide for themselves. They do need to actually do some of that work. It calls for them to either do community service or to work 20 hours. That is not a huge ask. I don't think that's a tremendous ask. If you are not disabled, elderly, or a child, then you should be able to do that much to actually contribute to your own care. Why do we need them to contribute to their own care? Because there are disabled, there are elderly, and there are children who absolutely need to have access to that program. And the funding that is attached to Medicaid and to ACA, that is not endless funding. So we cannot have 20-year-olds who are sitting at home who could be working, not working because they simply choose not to. That doesn't work when we need to take care of a 70-plus-year-old woman who truly, she did her part, but now she's elderly or even disabled, and she cannot provide for her own health care. That woman does need to be prioritized over a person who is able-bodied. So I'm not really clear on why Pritzker doesn't understand that. He should, since he's been serving in government for a while. But me, even as a regular citizen, I can understand that we need to prioritize those that are actually vulnerable over those who could actually contribute to their actual health and wellness.
Christian Maxwell, a candidate for Congress, of course, got to get through a primary, but the election's November 2026. Tell us where people can get more information about you and your candidacy.
Please. So they can actually come to my website, which is christianmaxwellforcongress.com. And that's where you can find all of my social media links, all of my policy beliefs, and just what I'm looking to do and impact as a person who's running for Congress and who is a regular civilian. Like I said, I have never sat and dreamed about going into politics, but when I sit back and look at all of the things that are just not working for Illinois families, I want to be a part of that change. And I would love to advocate for people who are like me. I understand what we're going through. So I would love to take that insight and that knowledge to DC so that legislation comes back to Illinois and actually improves our life in a big way.
Greatly appreciate your time. And again, that website for people, if they didn't get it the first time.
ChristianMaxwellForCongress.com.
All right, Christian, thank you so much. We'll definitely talk again in the near future because we've got a long slog to get to the primary, let alone the November election. So be safe out there,
Yes.
all right?
Thank you. You too, Greg.
It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and wake up with us each and every weekday morning for more Illinois in Focus.